Tensions between the United States and Venezuela are steadily escalating. The deployment of U.S. aircraft carriers in the Caribbean and the moves to label Nicolas Maduro as linked to terrorism have raised the regional temperature. Could the United States launch the interventions against Venezuela? And what strategic calculation lie behind the Washington targeting of Caracas? We will discuss the details with Professor Mehmet Özkan from the National Defense University. Mr. Özkan, thank you for accepting our interview. First of all, the U.S. has designated the Venezuela-based criminal organization Cartel de los Soles as a foreign terrorist organization. U.S. President Trump has placed the $50 million reward on the Venezuela President Nicolas Maduro and declared him a leader of the terrorist organization. Do you think this move is solely about commission drugs, or is Washington's real aim regime change?
It is far beyond fighting with cartels. It's exactly designed to make a regime change in Venezuela. It's very clear since the beginning. But we see from the news, from the leaks in the media, it's very clear that Trump wants a regime change in Venezuela. That is the real intention. But of course, fighting with narco-traffic groups and other issues are just source of the issue or spice of all this legitimization. But it's very clear that they want a regime change. It's very clear.
If a country is not aligned with Washington's interests, it quickly becomes a target for its lack of democracy and freedom. Do you think a similar framework is at work in U.S. policy towards Venezuela?
Venezuela has a domestic problem and regional problem and global problem since 2014 and 15. Since the death of Hugo Chavez in 2013, Venezuela entered in a turmoil, politically and economically and socially. And since 2016, more than 8 million people from Venezuela, they left the country. They are now based in many countries in South America. That created South American countries to pressure on the United States for a possible regime change or transformation in Venezuela. And at the same time, since 2016, you see lots of sanctions on Venezuela, and economically Venezuela is now very bad. So what we see, in last 6-7 years, we see isolation of Venezuela at international level and domestically is a weakened and also, lack of sort of less legitimacy in the context of elections as well in Venezuela. So what we see inside it is very weak and outside is very isolated Venezuela, what we see. That's why Trump wants to utilize this opportunity to use as a regime change, at the same time giving a message to both China and Russia that, southern hemisphere of the United States is part of United States influence. That is the renewed version of the Monroe Doctrine. That's what Trump wants. So he wants to give a message to many actors globally and also regionally in South America. So that's the general context. If you look at the results, politically, economic, energy-wise, and all the otherwise, America wants to intensify its control in the southern hemisphere, and through that, they want to give a message to key countries in different parts of the world. If you ask me why Americans now, Trump is targeting Venezuela, yes, there are these dimensions, but at the same time, there are energy dimensions, petrol dimensions. Now, Americans wants to control America. In Trump's understanding, Trump wants to divide the world again, and he cares who controls which part of the world. So Trump wants to control Southern America again as he wishes, as it was in the past. So he doesn't want another involvement. So what he sees as a thorny issue in Venezuela, and he wants to solve it through regime change or other means, but that is the real intention in that crisis.
Colombian President Gustavo Petro said the U.S.'s real concern is oil, claiming that the U.S. pressure aims to access energy resources. Do you think this assessment is correct? If so, is Venezuela's oil the U.S.'s primary target?
I think yes, because Petro is right. Americans does not say, but although some senators, they say very clearly that, energy is one of the main concern, but it's not the only concern. So it's one of the concern is also energy, because Venezuela has the biggest oil reserves in the world. So Americans think if they can influence, they can control those energy in Venezuela, they can pressure more on Russia, they can contribute, they can sort of have a pressure on Europe and other countries not to buy energy from Russia, so they can sell it. I think that's one of the natural result of this regime change that they want. But overall, this is an opportunity for the Americans as they see it. Politically, economically, and socially, it's a beneficial adventure that they are entering now. What will be the result is something else. So energy is one of the biggest result that they expect that will benefit for American companies and the American geopolitics in global politics.
The deployment of a U.S. aircraft carrier off Venezuela's coast, the growing military build-up in the Caribbean, and Venezuela's defense preparations, do these developments increase the likelihood of a potential intervention? How do you assess this scenario?
I think there are three scenarios that is very clear. For example, I don't see a big military intervention in Venezuela. That is something that Americans does not want for many years. So three scenarios. First is the negotiations that is happening to some extent, and sometimes they are giving message that they are happening. Also, and through the pressure of military buildup, Americans want to pressure Maduro to negotiate. That's the best way that they see. And second option is a targeted assassinations. Which could be the second options. Through military strikes, they can hit Maduro or his team or someone else or different groups inside Venezuela. The second options that could happen. That is why Americans give a notice that now, as you know, many airlines they cancel their flights to Venezuela. I think by doing that, Americans wants to control the space of the Venezuela, so they want to know who is there. There is no civilian flight, so they can do this target assassination perhaps as a second option. And third option is limited military intervention, which could be perhaps in Caracas or in some places, some strategic places, but I think it will be very limited and very ad hoc. That is the last option, by the way, probably Americans want, because limited military intervention can go out of the control and can turn a blown up and full-scale intervention. And in that case, we Americans can see their own Afghanistan or their own Ukraine in their neighbor in Southern Hemisphere. So also what we might see if there is a full military intervention in Venezuela, what we can see either as any of Libya as well. So that's what Americans does not want. So they prefer first negotiations, second target assassinations if possible, and third one is a limited military intervention. And when I say negotiations, I think negotiation is, we should not see that when negotiation is over, the other options will be on table. It can be vice versa as well, because eventually there is no mediator as of now in this crisis. What I see, for example, countries like Turkey or perhaps Colombia, perhaps even Brazil could act as a mediator in this conflict, especially Turkey is well positioned to do that, as Turkish President Erdogan has very good relations with President Maduro and President Trump. I think at any time when this country see crisis deepening, we may see a negotiated outcome as well, if the war is the only options. But as I say, out of these three options, I don't see any other option as of now. Of course, if things go out of the control, there are lots of collateral damages when you enter a war, when you go a military adventure, because things perhaps you cannot control. And Americans now, they want to have a very calculated, very controlled, very timely, military intervention or problem-solving issue in the case of Venezuela, because they know they have the experience of Afghanistan and Iraq that if you enter as a full scale, you may end up something that you never want.
So finally, White House sources have suggested that Trump wants to meet Maduro before any possible military intervention. Do you think such a meeting would actually take place? And if it does, what effect will it have on regional tensions?
Since Trump came to power, through special envoy Richard Grenade, there has been some meetings between American officials and Maduro. But apparently after 3-4 months, that connection has been lost. Now Marco Rubio, Foreign Minister of the United States or Secretary of State of the United States, has taken over this case, and he wants he's more for a military intervention, and he wants more a regime change. But Trump says that he's open to negotiations, yes, but I don't expect any Trump-Maduro meeting. But what can happen, perhaps through intermediaries or some sort of negotiation solution, is possible. That's why I focus on mediation efforts of the different countries would be important. So far, none of the countries has offered or none of the countries has involved, as we know, from the media. But that would be the best option. And I think I don't see another option. And many countries in the region would be happy that this conflict is solved through a negotiated outcome. Otherwise, imagine, Venezuela has had 30 million population. Now almost 8 million they dispersed in the continent. If a war or military adventure happens in Venezuela, and many other countries in the continent will receive more migrations that will extend the crisis to the continent. So many of them, they prefer a negotiated outcome. And Trump also apparently wants that. But there is also in the media, perhaps what can happen. The issue is whether Trump wants a negotiation with Maduro heading the country, or he wants a negotiation without Maduro. As I see, he wants Maduro out of the picture. That's what I see from Trump's perspective. The question is whether Maduro is ready to go out of the picture in exchange for a negotiated outcome. So this is the issue that still does not have an answer.